And you're very welcome along to another RTÉ Rugby podcast. A very happy Christmas to you. We missed you in the break in between, but we're delighted to join you. We're still going to be cranking these out in the Christmas break. Bernard Jackman is with us. He was down at the sports ground a few nights ago. He was also at Thomond Park as well on St. Stephen's Day for two close derby games. Strange ones though, Birch, insofar as I think they kind of went in opposite directions. The one at the sports ground was probably a poor enough game until the last 10 minutes. Whereas down in Thomond Park, we got an absolute belter of a game that somehow fizzled out in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, and it fizzled out due to Leinster's game management and just protecting a lead. And I thought, Ross Byrne just handled it really well. They knew they had the lead. They didn't want to give Leinster a sniff. They wanted to quell the crowd if they could. And, after two or three phases, they weren't really going forward. He just put up these high bombs and just turned Munster. And it's probably fitting that the end game finished with Munster having a scrum 5 yards out and having to try and run, down the field to try and win the game. And let's be honest, it was always going to be difficult for him to do that, and it ended up in a turnover. And I think probably Graham Rowntree was relieved that the referee killed the game rather than Leinster being allowed to play off that turnover, because they would have loved to take that bonus point away from Munster. But I think Munster get a lot of positives out of it, to be honest. I mean, what did you think?
Yeah, I actually did. It was a funny one. Even just to go away from the match itself. So obviously I've been down at home for Christmas since this day last week. And we had 2 years in a row of this fixture being postponed and then played behind closed doors or played before a Champions Cup last 16 where it didn't have the same fizz. And the buzz around the fixture itself for the few days beforehand, number one, was just brilliant. It was great to see. Tickets were absolutely scarce, which is fantastic as well. The second part, so I arrived out at Thomond Park on St. Stephen's Day about 5:30, so 2 hours before kickoff, which is roughly what I'd be arriving for pretty much any game. And just the buzz around the place, there were so many people hanging around, like the Shannon Bar, the Bose Bar, and even then, leaving the match afterwards, you're talking 11 o'clock, so about an hour and a half after the full-time whistle, there was just still loads of people mingling about when normally the place would be deserted, even for some of the bigger games as well. So it was just great to have that, I think, for so many people as well, and just the amount of friends I would have had going to it and stuff like that. It was just great to have that buzz back around. But on the game itself, it was a funny one because, as you say, there were plenty of positives for Munster, and I suppose the biggest one, arguably, is that they're coming away from a game against Leinster for the first time in God knows how long, thinking, geez, we left that one behind us. And I know at the time when we were speaking to Graham Rowntree after the game, he certainly didn't view that as a positive. He was pretty critical of the way his side had blown things, which I think is fair enough, because we've had a good few games this season where we've been speaking to the Munster coaches afterwards and after defeats, and they've been pointing out the positives in spite of a loss. But I certainly got the impression from Graham Rowntree that he let the players know about it after that game, because the way they just let it go from being 14-6 up 10 minutes into the second half with a man advantage and to all of a sudden find yourself 20-14 down it was unforgivable, really.
Yeah, I agree. And the key moment was the yellow card, because Leinster were efficient up till then, but they hadn't really fired many shots. Munster looked pretty comfortable defensively, and you felt, this game is going to just go down to goal kicking. And then, Munster, in fairness to them, they had a shift drive at the front, got a yellow card, and Leinster sprinted back. They sprinted back. It was noticeable, how quickly they wanted to get on with it. And in fairness to them, once they got the possession back from that kickoff, I think it was 2 days later, but they got possession back, then they just ramped it up and just started to carry with real venom, using their power game, and they started to punch holes in Munster. And I don't know what Graham Rowntree, I'd love to know what part of the plan is he critical of them not implementing? But in my opinion, it was just their inability to keep the same level of focus after that try, and started to milk penalties. And in fairness, I can't see that they were giving away some soft penalties early in the game as well. But it was really their inability, 15 against 14, to deal with that Leinster power game and ferocity and getting over the gain line. And obviously for Leinster to score when they did, straight away was just a real hammer blow. And then they just couldn't get down the field. And there was just a few little moments that Jack Curry missed touch of a penalty, which would have given him an entry point. And just inability to find field position, which is, I would credit some of that down to Leinster's game management and smarts. But yeah, Munster. I thought Munster looked better with Casey on at 9. I think they looked more dangerous with him on at 9 than they did before he came on. But there's still probably a few players short, to be honest.
Yeah, they certainly are. We'll kind of zone in on those 10 minutes because they were the making of the break in the game. But from the Munster side of things, like, the frustration is some of the penalties they gave away were just very, very cheap. Like, the first of those, a couple of phases after the restart, after the penalty try, was Conor Murray just kind of stepping into a ruck where, just to slow things down, where he didn't really have a business being in there. That sends Leinster down towards the 22. And then all of a sudden, Gavin Coombs gives away a penalty. That's kind of scrambling on your own line. But after Leinster scored that first try, then you have Calvin Nash just kind of reaching out for trying to make an interception, just that one-handed kind of lazy little grab, when he had actually done a good job of kind of getting the ball in moments earlier as well. It was the second one that he got caught out for with the deliberate knock on, and that just leads them back down. And then you've Keith Earls just dropping a simple ball in his own 22. And that's probably coming from the kind of the rush Leinster are putting on, the pace of the game they're bringing in. All of a sudden, there's a bit of nervous energy about the place. And then it's the 2 5-metre pick and goes that are just, it's so hard to get your head around, I suppose, if you're a Munster fan, where, okay, the first one, there's a bit of evasion there. Scott Penny, it's a well-worked play that kind of sends Scott Penny around, and you give Leinster credit for that, I think. But the second one is it's just so hard to look at again and see Dan Sheehan pick and go and just find his way between probably Dave Kilcoyne and Niall Scannell. Like, so often we're seeing these 5-metre starter plays almost quite regularly now, and it's very rarely the point of them to score off the first phase. It's to put yourself in a position to get a good carry and you poke a hole. But to see someone go over off the first phase like that is just far too easy.
Yeah, and I my good feeling being down there and seeing them off camera as well as on us, I felt they were punch drunk. I felt fitness actually played into some of it as well, Neil. I thought Leinster's ability to up the ante the last 20, and Munster just weren't able to. They looked tired bodies, and I think some of that fatigue was leading to some of those penalties and errors. I like, as you say, against Leinster, you need to be absolutely clinical. When you get the ball back or you get a chance, you got to take it, and then you got to get down there. Whereas, so go for example, I totally agree with your penalties that you just mentioned there, Connors and Calvin's, etc. But then that wasn't a great crossfield kick from Ross Byrne, to Jordan Larmour, and I should have mopped that up, and it was in the 22.
It wasn't a contested kick.
No, it was actually, and in fairness, from that, if you remember, because Keith didn't deal with it and Jordan won it back, then Ross went straight away. He crossed field to the other side. Was it to Sheen? And that led to the penalty, or Scott Penny, sorry, it was. That led to the penalty that they eventually tapped over. So you get one chance, you know what I mean? And the second one, Ross Byrne gets the ball back in his hands and he nails the second kick. And because Munster were quite narrow, that gives Leinster a penalty 5 yards out. So it's just the next level up. Now Munster are competitive. I actually, and I agree. I was like you. I was in there early and walking out. I think Munster fans realise that Munster are in transition, and I don't mean to be. I know some of them are sick of that word transition, but they genuinely can see that there is improvements, and that the team are playing with more heart, more vibrancy. They're trying to do things, etc. So I think I found the atmosphere and the reaction very tolerant and very understanding. Obviously, from Graham Rowntree point of view, Mike Prendergast's point of view, Dennis Leamy, etc., Andy Kiraku, if they can just get that win, if they could have got a win against Leinster there, it could have just made everything so much easier for them in terms of confidence and reinforcement of what they're doing. But they didn't, so they just got to crack on. And I'm looking forward to seeing their selection over the next couple of weeks. My opinion, without doing the numbers on it, was that they haven't really rested their internationals yet. So they've taken the gamble of playing them early, whereas Leinster and Ulster and Connacht even have managed to get those 2 games or at least 1 game into them. I think they need to get 2 games before the Six Nations rest. So that's going to be interesting for Munster. Do they now need to go to Ulster without Tyburn and Peter Manny, etc., or will they decide, to maybe rest them for a European game?
Yeah, and I think they've further games coming up in the URC before the Six Nations.
Yeah, they do. Have the lines in there's the lines in Cork next Friday, I think. Yeah.
And then away to Benetton as well. But just finally on Munster, before we go in and look at what Leinster were doing right. I think it's right what you were saying there about, they have kind of moved forward. I think the fans are becoming a bit more understanding of the situation they found themselves in. And I certainly found that after the game I went out and, met a few of my friends who were at the match, and it was, finally we weren't actually talking about issues with the game plan or, issues with, the chinks in their attack. It was more that they left it behind them. So we're kind of moving on from the point now of saying, we just need to give it time, and there needs to be a bit of patience to see how things go. There's a fair idea now of what the game looks like under them. It's just a case of the players rolling up their sleeves in the big day and getting it done. On Leinster, again, to go back on those 10 minutes, we've seen it now twice from Leinster in the course of this month. First against Ulster, when they found themselves, 21-3 down after midway through the first half, down to 13 men for a short little while and 14 men for the rest of the game. They turned that around. Then at Thomond Park, they're down to 10 men and they're 14-6 down, and they scored 2 tries in those 10 minutes. As a coach, is that something you can see from Leinster, where they are probably spending a lot of time on the training pitch, training in these situations where they're a man down and where they need to work things out? We were asking Leo Cullen about it, for example, and he said, we were asking what messages are you trying to get on during that point. He said that was all the players out there. They've been in these situations. They know what things they need to go to when they are a man down or we're in these tricky situations. But it's twice now in the last month where they've found themselves in massive, massive holes, and they've got themselves out of it pretty comfortably. Yeah, no,
I think they can start. If you're Leinster and you have that much time together as they have, I mean, obviously, they brought in Jason Jenkins and Charles Natai, but in general, it's a neither of them played the weekend, but it's a very settled team, a team who've been together for a long time, a team who understand exactly what Lancaster in particular, wants in terms of on the playing field. Obviously, Leo off it, but and they've got to a level where they can actually really focus on those last things now. Like Munster, there's no point Munster spending a huge amount of time talking about, what do we do when we're, a man in the bin or whatever, and we're 14-6 up. It's because they're trying to find the nuts and bolts of their game and trying to find the best combinations, etc. Build confidence. They would obviously do it, but Leinster now are just literally, being able to work on a huge amount of scenario-based things, and they'll be disappointed that they're having to put them into place in games, because obviously it's not ideal to have a red card or the yellow card like we saw at the weekend, but at a key moment when you're down. But I think there's a huge amount of confidence, there's a huge amount of desire to make sure that when they get to the knockout stages that they don't come unstuck by something out of the ordinary or a discipline issue, etc. And in fairness to discipline, the discipline is usually very, very good. I mean, and that's probably, like, if you look at the referee from the weekend, Busby, he was really hard on the attacker not rolling away. And he always is. And Leinster, they got caught once or twice, but in general, they were much cleaner in that area than Munster. And that's just, I suppose, a real sign of a team who know how important discipline is. And it's been a constant issue for Munster, to be honest, this season. I mean, Graham has spoke about it a few times. So, but eventually that will get sorted out, and then Munster will be even harder to beat. Whereas Leinster have already gone through all these stages, and this is effectively the end of Leinster's current cycle, realistically, with Stuart leaving, Johnny retiring, etc. So it's I think it's to be expected that they are more calm and have more composure in those situations, and are able to fix it on the field.
And we spoke about, like, just to kind of follow on from the theme of Leinster having the luxury of being able to really, really work on these kind of situations in training. The other situation they seem to be doing an awful lot of work on are the 5-metre tap and goes.
Yeah.
We spoke about how frustrating it is from a Munster point of view to let those in, but we're seeing it quite often now from Leinster where they've got great little innovations on it. They scored one against Racing 92 with Josh van der Fleer.
Yeah, extra pass.
And I know, for example, that Leo Cullen has mentioned the Bulls as being the inspiration for a lot of so much over the last few months, ever since they got stung by them at the RDS last season. But they're really, really putting a huge amount of work into it. And he was saying, for example, the one where Scott Penny scored on, he said he's pretty sure that one was actually drawn up by Scott himself to put himself in. That one was come up with him. But again, it just shows the amount of work that they're able to put into a really, really small but a very, very important part of the game.
Yeah, and to be honest, like I didn't realize Leo had said that, but I definitely would have. I remember the shock and surprise when the Bulls pulled something new against Leinster, and it was probably the key score in that game. And I'm not surprised Leinster have looked to bring some creativity to it. In fairness to them, they actually probably don't really need to, because normally, if Sheehan gets tackled, at source there when he takes the first tap, you normally would back Leinster's, ability to pound and ground a pound towards the post. But they, against the one against Racing, the one against Munster, and probably because they'd scored the first one against Munster, that allowed Sheehan to get the second one. If you get me, normally defenders who are opposite the first tapper are just focused on him, and that's why it's probably, when you think about it, that's probably why he was allowed to get under. Leinster had sowed a seed of doubt in Munster's mind, because they changed the point of contact for Scott Penny. But again, it's not just, it's a lovely little play. It's creative, but you have someone like Scott Penny coming onto the ball. Like, did Munster, I'm not saying anything against Munster's back row or whatever, but Coombs obviously is someone that they could use, but Scott Penny, he doesn't start for Leinster, but probably in that space, he's as good as anyone in the URC, so they have the cattle as well. But yeah, it is good to see them having different ways of attacking, but they know, if it comes to it and they have to roll up their sleeves and win the battle of the body heights and play 10 phases. They're like Exeter were back in, a couple of years ago. They love that. They love it, and they're very, very good at it.
Yeah, and Graham Rowntree actually said exactly what you were saying there on the Dan Sheehan one, where he was saying they were probably waiting for Leinster to do something rather than just go straight. But he said ultimately, first things first, you just have to make the first tackle. Before we move on to Connacht, a couple of players to mention from the other day. Joe McCarthy, that probably one of the best games he's put in a Leinster shirt so far. I know he hasn't played too many of them, but he really, really seemed to stand up to the occasion.
Yeah, he did, and it was an interesting selection. Him and Ryan Baird to start. Obviously, Baird had been going very well at 6. Look at Joe as a player that they have huge, Leinster and Ireland have huge hope and expectation for. It was great to see him get a start in that type of game. I thought he did really well. He handled himself really well. And the reality is, someone like Joe McCarthy would start probably most weeks in the other provinces, and whereas in Leinster he's having to fight now for game time, and he has to be good and he has to perform, and Jason Jenkins coming in, like a lot of clubs wouldn't have signed Jason Jenkins because they had Joe McCarthy, but that's just the level that they're operating at. Max Deegan, he's been really good this season, but he's struggling to get the big games. He got to start the other night. It's phenomenal depth, and I think that's making those youngsters even better. Jamie Osborne, he was excellent.
I was going to mention him. I was going to mention him as well.
Yeah, Robbie Henshaw and Charles Natai. So he knows he has to be good, or he mightn't see a match day for a while. And it's phenomenal, the depth they have, and then that the youngsters, in fairness to them, continue to impress. And they keep showing signs of improvement, which is probably down to the environment and down to the talent they have.
Yeah. On on Connacht then this weekend. It's Leinster and Connacht at the RDS. That's live on RT2 and RT Player and RT Radio 1 as well. But it's hard to see how Connacht eke out a win based on the first 70 odd minutes they put in against Ulster. As Andy Friend said it after the match, look, it was a great fight back, but ultimately you can't be expecting to take anything out of the game when you play for 10 minutes.
Strange, isn't it? Connacht's attack, it's still
what's happened to it, because
it's just non-existent.
Yeah.
It's not a threat at all, and I think Ulster were there for. They're certainly susceptible to be beaten. You know, they Ulster weren't great either. They went to their line-out maul, and that won them a game again. And it's great to have that weapon. But I think Connacht have obviously spent so much time focusing on being harder to beat, being gritty, being defensively better. Their USP or their super strength is disappeared, and I didn't have the Bundy was quiet. I mean, Bundy had a very, very quiet game. I was shocked they didn't try and get him into Doak's channel. You know, Doak playing a 10. I would have given him go forward, but they used him more as a distributor. And actually, ironically, and I know the whole attitude and mindset changed, but Hawkshaw, when he came on at 12, gave them a little bit more. It was, he was impressive again. So yeah, it was just, look, the reality was my thought going out was, for Connacht to have won that match, Bundy needed to have a big game. And I'm not saying it's all on him, but he just was quiet. He just had a quiet game, and then just wondering what's gone on with their attacking game, because and in fairness, it probably started with their kicking game. Their kicking game was atrocious, which didn't give them really many attacking opportunities. But it's going to be, it's a tough one for them to lose, because all Christmas you're thinking about the RDS and you're watching Leinster, and that some of the big guns are going to come back in, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough this weekend.
Yeah, and like when you're looking at the Connacht attack then and trying to figure out what is at fault at the moment, do you think is it a shape issue? Are they not really kind of actually creating things? Is it an issue where the fundamentals are right, but they're giving away cheap penalties at attacking breakdowns? Is it simple handling errors? Is it a combination of everything?
Yeah, I think their handling is doesn't seem to be as slick as it was. A lot of passes in behind. They're trying to use this tactic, which is like a stack. So a lot of teams are using this late sweep, where people come late around the corner and square up. But they're doing it maybe with one player extra. It's a stack, and they're not really getting around a corner, so they're very lateral, and it's very easy for teams to come in and shut them down. So that's something that they had. Look, it's great to see teams trying different things. I would say their attacking shape that they played with last year, the year before, was already a decent shape, and was asking questions and allowing some of their X factor players to get mismatches and get their hands free in contact. So the reality for me is that they need to start chasing points now as well, and I think they're going to have to relook at that. And the Challenge Cup will give them a chance to do that. To be honest, I know that they rotate players and that's great to rest, but it really is a 2-week block where if you are going to make significant changes to your game, that would be the time period to look at it. Particularly if you're going to go back to something you've already done, if you know what I mean. So I don't expect huge change this weekend against Leinster, and Leinster's defence, to be fair, it shut down Munster's attack pretty well, and they're very good defensively. But yeah, I would say Connacht, for the run in for the second half of the season, may look at a variation in their attacking shape to try and get them running that space a little bit more and get them creating more line breaks and tries.
Yeah, and like the second half of the season is a bit more. It's a bit fairer on Connacht. Like this is the last Interpro, for example, between now and the end of the regular season. But with that in mind, anyway, is just going forward in the URC, not even this season, but next season as well. It just always feels that the deck is stacked a little bit against Connacht with the fixtures list they are actually going to have, because they'll have 6 games against Leinster, Ulster, Connacht. They've only lost 3 of their last 9 games, but it's against Leinster, Ulster, and Munster. Sorry, I said Connacht earlier and said one of the other provinces. But ultimately, they've got a tougher run of games than what you'd say some of the Welsh or the Scottish teams have. I know it's relative as well, but it always feels like they are just going to be chasing things every season.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. And I think that's why Andy Friend and Andy Friend's replacement will need to be an optimist, and to not have a chip on the shoulder, or to not show that chip on the shoulder to the players, and understand how difficult it is for them being the pool with the other Irish teams. Like I watched the Welsh derbies, and interesting contest, but I think Connacht could, if they were in that pool, would be contenders for Champions Cup. It's just the reality of it is that they have to play 6 games against better opposition than most in the URC. So it is tough on them, but that's what it is. I think they've built some new depth, and I like Niall Murray, Oisin Dowling played 6 at the weekend, which I thought was interesting. Keane Prendergast now being tried as an 8. We give him, an extra ball carrier.
How do you see Prendergast as an 8?
Yeah, I think he's good. I think he's explosive. I think he's explosive. Obviously, then gives you an extra line-out option at 6 because they can bring Dowling in at 6. Now Boyle, in fairness, I like Boyle as well. I think Jared Butler has been brilliant signing for Connacht, but maybe isn't making the big impacts that probably they need from their 8. So I think it's good for Prendergast to show versatility. But I don't think I think it's because Connacht think he can be an 8 for them and help them win games at 8. So there is some youngsters coming through the academy. Tierney Martin looks good when he gets a chance. Sam Elo. So they are building more depth, and obviously then they brought in the Doodies and the Josh Murphys and Adam Burns. It's great to see Adam Burns get another try. But again, it's just at a time now where their attacking game has just gone dead on them. So it's all well and good to have more depth, but you'd like to have that alongside a game plan or that was functioning a little bit better, and that's something that they will fix. There's no doubt, but they got to fix it pretty quickly.
Can you see them getting anything out of the RDS on Sunday?
No, I can't, to be honest, because I think Leinster obviously are just a machine at the moment, and haven't shown any signs of being willing to let up. And I think complacency it doesn't really seem to affect them. What's cost Leinster? Leinster's downfall in terms of winning trophies has been massive, powerful teams. That I don't think it's being complacency by any manner of means, and I think that they change up a couple of personnel will come in. They'll get a boost out of having won in Thomond. Big crowd in the RDS New Year's Day and New Year's evening and day evening, and they'll be loving it. It could be horrible for Connacht. Now Connacht, in fairness, will make it difficult for them, but it has. If Leinster hit their straps, it could be tough.
Yeah. So the other game then on New Year's Day is going to be Ulster and Munster at Kingspan Stadium. I find this one really hard to get my head around or to even predict until I see what the teams are going to be, because we've seen, as you said earlier on, we've seen Munster, for example, pretty much pick their best team for probably 4 or 5 weeks in a row now since the Six Nations. So it feels that the likes of Peter O'Mahony, Tyke Byrne will have to be rested at some point, and it might have to be this weekend. Ulster, they rested players for the week after the or not Six Nations, the Autumn Internationals, but they were back then for the Leinster game. So there's probably one more week in the next few where they have to as well. So I think it's actually really, really tough to get a gauge on how to call this one until we see teams probably Friday afternoon. But on the match itself, and maybe to touch on Ulster from the Connacht game, it's not a win that's going to turn the season around entirely, but it stops the bleeding a little bit. And ultimately, they were in such a tough run. But when you look at the table of the URC in particular, they're still third place, comfortably inside that top 4, and probably one win away from getting back into second spot. So for as tough a run as they had and as tough a 4 weeks as they've had, they're still in quite a good position.
Yeah, they are, as long as they just get back on the horse. And the win in Connacht was ugly. And obviously they had that scare moment at the end, which would have been, if they had drawn that game, you know, I think that I suppose that doubt around where they're at would have lasted. I think the win will cure it. It's a hard-earned win in a way, and hopefully that'll give them a little bit more confidence again, because I think their confidence was definitely dented by Leinster, and that destroyed them. That turnaround that Leinster put in on them seems to have just mentally scarred them, and you know they needed to get that win. They backed it up with a win against Munster, and they'll be back on track. And obviously Ravenhill, you know, they've missed Ravenhill as well. Obviously found it difficult in Sale, found it difficult in Aviva, back in front of their home fans. On form, Munster can win that easily. I mean, but I don't, not easily, but they can win it. But I'd have to fancy Ulster, to be honest. I think Ulster win it. Ulster are a top 4 team. It would have taken, like, if Ulster had to miss out in top 4 at the end of the season, you know, it would have been a massive shock. And I think they're good enough to get that right, and they'll recover from this little blip and start to crank up some wins again.
Would it concern you from an Ulster point of view that there was a running theme last season of Ulster struggling in the last quarter of games where they were otherwise leading? You know, they had a lot of games where they either threw away leads and lost, or just about held on, having conceded a couple of cheap late tries. Early on in the season, it looked like they'd put that behind them. They were kind of putting teams to bed nice and early in matches and seeing it out professionally. But even before the blip of this month, you know, we had them down in Thomond Park where they looked completely comfortable against a fairly second string Munster team due to their massive injury list. But, you know, we're given a bit of a scare towards the end. They obviously had their issue against Leinster and then against Connacht, conceding 2 tries in the last few minutes as well. Is there a worry that is kind of creeping back into their game a little bit?
Yeah, I think there has to be worry about all kinds of all aspects of their mental state, to be honest, and ability to be absolutely ruthless and stay composed and kill teams off. And until they start to have a track record, not once, you know what I mean? Like the fight back against La Rochelle, that's irrelevant. You know, the game was, they need to just build up this track record of success before we can say, look, that's not part of their DNA at the moment. And McFarland and his coach staff will be aware of that, and the players will be aware of that. But until you, as I said, quash it, and sometimes it's not in the media, it's in the dressing room. You know, players just starting to pull up, and you know, Sir Alex Ferguson said that they used to win games in injury time, not just because of what they did, but because the opposition expected you know, Man United to come at them. And it seems like Ulster in some cases nearly start to pull up themselves, you know, and allow teams at them, and that's an awful trait to have in a team. So it's something that they need to deal with. But look, at the only place to deal with is on the field, and they were just so happy to get back to Ravenhill, I think, and Munster coming up is an exciting challenge, and that's probably the occasion they need just to get back in full swing, because the Connacht performance was only probably 7 out of 10 for them, less, maybe 6 out of 10, which shows the quality they have.
Yeah, certainly is. So that game's 5:15 on New Year's Day. That is live on RTÉ Radio 1 commentary on that evening. As I said, Leinster and Connacht then coming up 7:35, also on RTÉ Radio 1 and live on the TV as well, RT2 and RT Player. Birch, before we finish up our last pod of 2022, what's your highlight of the rugby year?
Ireland win the series in New Zealand for me. Yeah,
that was probably an easy question.
Sorry, I was. Yeah, that was it. You?
Yeah. I mean, it has to be that. I think I'm torn between the second and third tests, just because they were just as good as each other. I think the second test was probably the more surprising result. I think by the third test, we probably felt a lot more confident in how they were going to go. So I think maybe the second test is in Dunedin is probably the one that gets the edge for me if we're talking about individual matches, just because they were coming from such a poor start in the series and just flipped it all on its head. And by the time they were down in Wellington in the cake tin, you actually kind of felt fairly confident for them.
Sure. No, I agree. Look at it, and it's led then to obviously a good November, and real belief and hope for a good Six Nations and World Cup. So Irish rugby is in a strong place. Yeah,
fingers crossed for a good 2023. Tackling the All Blacks, by the way, that kind of our RTÉ's documentary that's going to be on this Thursday evening. So that's Thursday the 29th for those of us checking this out on RT1 6:30 p.m. Tackling the All Blacks will be on RT1 6:30 p.m. on Thursday evening. Birch, thanks a million for joining us. Thanks a million for taking time. Your dead zone
the RDS or
New Year's. Right, and I'll see you at the RDS on New Year's Day. Have a happy New Year.
You too. Bye bye.